Let's look at linear equations. I'm going to show you the different types of linear equations that can be solved, and then let's look at the steps for solving them. So there are three types of linear equations you can solve for. The first kind of equation that can be solved is a conditional equation, and that is where there is just one solution. The second equation you can solve is the identity equation, and that's where you have infinite solutions and your solution set will be all real numbers. When you go to solve the identity equation, you'll end up with 0 equals 0. So 0 always equals 0. You could, I guess, end up with something like 1 equals 1, or 3 equals 3, or x equals x even. But anything you put into the equation would work. So that's why it's the identity equation. Okay. And the third equation that you have is an inconsistent equation, and this is where you have no solution. When you go to solve an inconsistent equation, you'll end up with something either like 0 equals 5, or 2 equals 3. Okay? If you, for some reason, had let's look at the conditional equation. If you had 0 equals x, then that means x equals 0, and that is not inconsistent. That is conditional. That means that you do have one solution, and that solution is 0. But if you have all of your variables go away, then that means that you have no solution, as long as one side does not equal the other. Okay, let's go over the steps for solving a linear equation, and then we'll look at some examples of how to solve them. So the first step for solving a linear equation is to simplify the algebraic expression on both sides of the equation. So on each side of the equation, you either need to distribute or add like terms on each side of the equation with each expression. So the second step after you simplify the algebraic expressions on both sides is to collect all the variable terms on one side of the equation and all of the constants, or the numbers without a variable, on the other side of the linear equation. So just bring everything with a variable over to one side, everything else on the other side. So step 3 would be to isolate the variable by multiplying or dividing the constant. So if the variable has, for example, 4x, you would divide both sides by 4 to get the divide both sides by 4 to get the variable all by itself. If there is a fraction in front, if there is a fraction, you'd multiply by the reciprocal. So if your constant is being multiplied by 3/4, then you multiply both sides of the equation by 4/3, and that cancels the fraction out. After you solve for isolate the variable, then you have the solution. So step 4 would be to just check your solution. So you just plug your solution back into the original equation. All right, let's look at our first example. 3 times 2x minus 5 equals 2x minus 1. So the first step would be to distribute that 3 through on the left side of the equation. So we have 3 times 2 and 3 times negative 5. So that ends up being 6x minus 15 equals 2x minus 1. Now we're going to combine like terms, so let's subtract that 2x over. So we've got 4x equals, and then we're going to add that 15 over. 4x equals 14. And then let's divide both sides by 4. And x is going to be equal to 14/4. Now that is not our final answer because we can reduce it. So think of a common factor that goes into both 14 and 4. It would be 2. And so 14 divided by 2 is 7. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. All right, there we go. There is our solution to our first problem. Let's look at one more here. All right, this one is a little tricky because it involves fractions. And there is a special little thing you can do if your problem involves fractions that makes it so there's no more fractions in there. And that is by multiplying each term through by the least common denominator. Remember, the least common denominator is the number or the term that has each of these as a factor, but it's the lowest one of that. So if you think of the factors of 5, you have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. If you go to the factors of 4, well, first of all, 2 is a factor of 4, so you don't really need to kind of consider 2 at all, because 2 does already go into 4. So we need the least common denominator between 5 and 4. The factors of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. We said 20 with 5, so that means that the least common denominator between 2, 5, and 4 is 20. That is the smallest number that multiplies, or that has the factors of 2, 5, and 4 in it. So we're going to go through and multiply every term by 20. So we're going to go 20x over 2 plus 3/5 times 20 equals 1/4 times 20. And we will simplify that, and every fraction should be eliminated by multiplying through by that least common denominator. So 20 over 2 is 10x. 3/5, this one's a little bit harder. Go 5 into 20 first. 20 divided by 5 is 4. And 3 times 4 is 12. Then 4 goes into 20 5 times. So 1/4 times 20 is 5. A fraction times a number like that, just think of it as that number divided by whatever is in the denominator of the fraction. So denominator means divide. Now we're going to solve this equation in our basic ways. By subtracting that 12 over, we get 5 minus 12 is negative 7. And divide both sides by 10. X equals negative 7 over 10. And there is our final answer for that example.